Good afternoon, everyone. We are delighted that you're here. I'm Ellen Miller, President, League of Women Voters of Johnson County. Will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. You may be seated. At this time, I would like to introduce Alyssa Wiegers of the Girl Scout Troop 506 from Lansing. Thank you for being here very much. Alyssa is going to sing with her friends the first verse of America the Beautiful.
Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesty above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with sisterhood from sea to shining sea. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for being here this afternoon. There are a few other important events, understand the way of sports going on. This is a very special celebration of voter and women's rights. And we're very delighted that you are able to join us. I do need to ask a question of the audience. Are there any deaf here today for whom we should continue the translation? Would you please raise your hands? That was a question that we needed to ask. Now, moving along here, let me present one of the 50 people in Kansas City you ought to know, and if you don't, by the end of today, you will. He has won 3 Emmys for excellence from the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences. He is executive producer of Public Affairs and News at KCPT Television. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Nick Haines.
Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. That actually sounded like the kind of applause one would get if we were celebrating the 9th anniversary of the League of Women Voters. What kind of reception would I have received if we were celebrating the 100th anniversary? To remind ourselves of one of the best musicians ever to come out of Kansas City, American rapper Tech-9. This is a celebration. Stomp your feet and clap your hands. It's a celebration. Yes. We're gonna do 100 of those. That was 8 of them. Seats 4 through 5 really giving us gusto for 100th anniversary. You know, this is a party, and sometimes you have to bring the party with you. There's no noise maker on this one, but when I come back to the 200th anniversary, I will have added that for you. By the way, I did ask. I said, well, this is a party. Are we going to be having champagne? And I was told we will have a personalized bottle of bubbly for you, Nick. Now, technically that was true, but what they provided me was a bubble bath. Not quite what I had in mind, but they did say, and they also said that bubbly would be over ice, and I got that too. But it was a packet of icy hot. Does anybody use this, ladies and gentlemen? Let me throw that to you, miss. There we go. You're going to have that. Let's not forget what this is all about. And I love cracking open the history books. I work for a public television station that prizes itself on looking at history. And I just want to give you 2 quotes to remind ourselves of what this is all about. Okay, so 100 years ago, when women still didn't have the right to vote, that wouldn't come until the August of 100 years ago, we had the head of the California Democratic Caucus, a senator by the name of J.B. Sanford, who would say, "The mother's influence is needed in the home. She can do little good by gadding the streets and neglecting her children. Let her be content with those high home duties intended to her by the great Creator." And then we had one of the most prestigious professors at MIT who also weighed in, and he was really far more concerned about women's health. "We must not forget pregnancy and lactation, both of which are a great strain on a mother's vitality. Any further strain, like the responsibilities of voting, is bound to be harmful to both mother and child." Now, you can understand why it took so long, because they were so concerned about you. Very concerned about you, ladies and gentlemen. By the way, we have the most amazing speaker today, the former Treasurer of the United States. And it's one thing to have amazing credentials, but I've spent the last 20 minutes backstage. She's flown in from San Francisco, by the way. One of the most amazing, energetic speakers. You're in for a treat. And we'll also be taking your questions. But because it's hard to get a microphone everywhere here, you would have been handed cards. So if you have any questions, jot them down, and I will be getting those from you. In fact, we have volunteers who will come around. Those are the individuals wearing sashes who will come by and then take your card, and we'll make sure we'll move that along. We're all about audience engagement here. But I'd like to introduce you right now, though, as we continue with our program, to the person who is chairing this whole 100 centennial celebration of the League of Women Voters here in Johnson County. Please welcome to the stage Donna Laufer. Donna, good to see you.
100 years, can you believe it? I sometimes feel like I'm 100 years old, but not today. I'm so glad to see so many familiar faces and new faces today. A special welcome to our elected officials. If you are an elected official, would you please stand? These folks deserve our gratitude and thanks for the difficult job of governing. And if we'd ask you if you could gather by the stage after the event so we could take a picture, we'd really appreciate it. And thank you to the committee and all the many hours they have devoted to this event. We started working on it about 2 years ago. You are truly a remarkable group of hardworking ladies. Committee folks are wearing these beautiful sashes today. They were made by one of our members, Mary Bognich, so look for them. They will be the ones picking up your cards, and if you have any questions, see them. And thank you for the generous donations that we've received from a lot of our members, from the Johnson County Community Foundation, from Park University, from Fred and Carol Logan, and many members of our league. So thank you very much for your support of this event. And now I'll turn it back to our MC, Nick.
Thank you very much, Donna. Imagine for a moment we are back in 1920, and if you're over 14, by the way, in 1920, 100 years ago, there's a 66% chance right now you'll be married if you're over 14, because that's what the age for marriage was. And you probably would be married for life, since the divorce rate is 6%. If you're over 54, you're very, very lucky, because most people in America don't even live that long, because you would have exceeded US life expectancy. We've only got 3 or 4 people over that here today. 100 years ago, movies would have been silent, television doesn't exist, and Barry Manilow is releasing his first hit song. That part is not true. The rest is true, ladies and gentlemen. The United States president is Woodrow Wilson, but if you're a woman, you've had no chance to vote for him because you haven't got the vote yet. So, and he actually opposed it, of course, for a long time. Remarkably, though, in this room with us is somebody who was born into that world I've just described. Jean Hershteiner, she's with us, 100 years old this very year. Jean, Jean, is she at the front here? Jean, this is a lifelong League of Women voter. Wow. We like to think of these things as being something that was, oh my God, that was in the distant past. Some people would have been born into that life, that women would have been not considered good enough to have the vote in this country. By the way, a fun fact about Jean, in her neighborhood, she says she doesn't allow residents, they don't allow residents to put in yard signs, so she puts a sign on the back window of her car and leaves the garage door up so people know where she stands. So absolutely, everybody can make a difference depending on where they are and what they're doing in the world. And we're very much appreciating that. Right now, joining us on the stage is the former Kansas State Representative, former Johnson County Commissioner, former President of the League of Women Voters, Dolores Furtado.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It is time to reflect on the Celebrating the Right to Vote luncheons, an annual event that successfully raised funds and raised awareness about 2020. So it all started in January 2001, when Janice McMillan and I were co-presidents. Janice, won't you please stand and be acknowledged by the audience? We introduced to our board the fact that the 100th birthday of the League US would happen in 2020. We proposed that this was cause for celebration and that we start raising funds by hosting a luncheon annually. There was complete silence. I had thought of all the possible questions and I had answers, but the question I got, and Myrna Stringer, I hope she's among us, but if she is, do acknowledge her, because she asked me, Dolores, who's going to be here? My spontaneous response, angels would be welcomed. Our first event occurred October 2001 at this community college. Over 250 attendees, including students, heard our speaker, Carolyn Jefferson Jenkins, president of the U.S. League, enthusiastically support our plan. The support of longtime members sustained our commitment. We moved the event to the Ritz-Charles to accommodate the increase in attendance and also for the ease of parking. In 2005, our speaker was Susan Stamberg, Susan Stamberg, a storyteller on NPR who delighted the 350 or so attendees at our event that day. Generous contributions from members of the League and from our community helped grow the 2020 fund and allowed us to think about inviting another national speaker. So in 2010, the luncheon featured Anne Kornblut, who at that time was a White House reporter for the Washington Post. She spoke about the economic challenges of war and of the recession. The recession caused us to have to find a new venue, not to mention heightened concerns about fundraising. So we decided to end the annual luncheon so that we could focus on 2020 and preserve the $19,000 that we had collected for the celebration. While we regretted very much having to cancel, it was important that the goal remain intact. That is, to have a birthday celebration in 2020. So here we are, 20 years later, and eager to go on. To those among us today who supported the Celebrating of the Right to Vote luncheons and contribute to the fund, thank you for your generous support. To the angels, this celebration also belongs to you, and to all the women who paved the way for us. Your commitment inspires us to lead the way through another century. And so I'll invite you at the conclusion to partake of some birthday cake, because that's what it's all about. Thank you very much.
Did you say birthday cake? I'm in, Dolores. Okay, we'll get some of that a little bit later on. And some punch, I believe. No champagne, but there will be some punch. It's been said that large generations of Americans learned more about math, grammar, history, and civics from the Saturday morning ABC cartoon show Schoolhouse Rock than from any book or teacher. The thinking was that the best way to trick children into learning was to wrap lessons inside catchy, funky tunes with clever messages that have now taken up permanent residence in the brains of millions of Americans, whether they like it or not. Reprising the show's soulful, historic recounting of the women's voting movement, Suffering Till Suffrage, please welcome the cast of Music Theatre Kansas City under the direction of Julie Danielson.
Too long at all since we even had the right to cast a vote. Yeah, was just a men bowed down and called us missus. Let us wash out and wash the dishes. But when the time rolled around to elect a president, what'd they say, sister? What did they say? They said, see you later, alligator. And don't forget my mashed potatoes, 'cause I'm going downtown to cast my vote for president. Tell him, sister, oh, we were suffering until suffrage. Whoa, not a woman here could vote no matter what age. No. Then the 19th Amendment struck down that restricted rule. Oh, yeah. But now we pull down our lever, cast our ballots, and we endeavor to improve our country, state, county, town, and school. Tell 'em about it. Those pilgrim women who raped the vote. They took a girl, cooked the turkey, but they could not vote. Even Betsy Ross, who sold the flag, was left behind the first election day. What a shame, sister. Then Susan B. Anthony, yeah, and Julia Howe, Lucretia Mott, and others. They showed us how they carried signs and marching lines until at long last the law was passed. That's right. Oh, we were suffering until suffrage. Whoa, not a woman here could vote no matter what age. No. Then the 19th Amendment struck down that restricted rule. Oh, yeah. And now we pull down our lever, cast our ballots, and we endeavor to improve our country, state, county, town, and schools. My vote, yes, the 19th Amendment struck down a restricted rule. Yeah, yeah, yes, the 19th Amendment struck down that restricted rule. Yeah, yeah, yes, the 19th Amendment struck down that restricted rule. Yeah, yeah. Since 1920, sisters unite. Vote on.
Excellent job. We can officially say the party has started. Music Theatre Kansas City. Give them another round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. That was really superb. By the way, they're preparing for their next big show, which is the Little Shop of Horrors. They play, by the way, in the live theater at what was the B&B Theaters at 435 and Midland Drive in Shawnee. That is now their new home, doing lots of shows. And they're a hop, skip, and a jump from us again at the B&B Live Theater, 435 and Midland Drive. Little Shop of Horrors coming our way during spring break starting March 15th. Next up on this celebration of 100 years of the League of Women Voters, we've brought a speaker to you that has flown all the way from San Francisco, California to be with us. She is the woman, actually, whose signature appears on most of the paper bills in your wallet. And I actually checked mine before coming, and her name is on all of them. That's because for 8 years, up until 2016, she was the Treasurer of the United States. She was appointed by Barack Obama. Having your name, though, on the nation's cash is just one of the perks of the job. A lot more to it than that. During those 8 years, our speaker this afternoon led the charge to return a woman's image to America's paper money. Yeah. That was going to be Harriet Tubman, of course, on the $20 bill. Spoiler alert, it hasn't happened yet. Hasn't happened yet. But it's only the 100th anniversary. She also leads a project aimed at increasing the number of women in public places. Now, apparently, Central Park in New York City is jam-packed with statues. But why is it, she wondered, that the only women there were Mother Goose and Alice from Alice in Wonderland, two fictional characters? She's helping change that. Is she the perfect person to represent us today as we look at the vitality of women as we go forward after 100 years of suffrage in this country? She is here. Ladies and gentlemen, the 43rd Treasurer of the United States, Rosie Rios.
Thank you. I am humbled by far, and I am absolutely thrilled to be here. I want to thank Donna and Jody and Ellen and Julie and everyone who made me feel so welcome today to come all this way to be here. I'm absolutely thrilled. Some of you may have heard me speak at the League of Women Voters National Convention a couple years ago. I swear I have new material, I swear. But I'm just honored, really, to be part of this celebration, part of this commemoration. I thought I'd start by bringing up the one issue I was told not to bring up. It's the elephant in the room. I know everyone's going to kill me for bringing it up. I'm going to do it. I'm a 49er fan. I know. No, you deserved it. You deserved it. I know. It was. I saw every minute of it. It was very sad, but congratulations, really. You did deserve it. So I am here to talk about kind of my journey as an accidental everything. I'm an accidental feminist. I'm an accidental educator. I'm an accidental historian. And it started with my time in Treasury way back when. Actually, I was part of the Treasury Federal Reserve transition team at the height of the financial crisis starting in November of 2008. And it was during that time where literally there I was, right before that, living in San Francisco as managing director of investments for a $22 billion firm. My daughter was 8, my son was 12. I had just closed on a major transaction, I get the phone call. So this is when Congress had just passed that legislation in October of 2008 to put the economy back on track. And so they were looking for finance professionals to come in to help implement that legislation with the current administration, the Bush administration, should Obama win in November, so that when Obama took office in January of 2009, it would literally be a smooth transition. So I was one of about 24 finance professionals who were brought in to what I thought was going to be a 4-month assignment that turned into a 10-year journey in DC, and my journey still continues to this day. And it really started with this photo, which you already saw. I asked them to use this as the backdrop for that wonderful trio that just sang. This was something that I came across in the Historical Resource Center in Treasury. Now, for those of you who don't know, Treasury just didn't make money. they actually produced all the financial products of the federal government. Everything from currency to food stamps to postage stamps to savings bonds, military payment certificates. They still produce the security page of your passport. And it was in the Historical Resource Center where I would take my breaks. Where you remember the financial crisis, it was a very, very scary time. And so when I would escape every so often for my little breaks, I would escape to this room. And I came across this photo. This is from 1913. This is 7 years prior to the passage of the 19th Amendment granting women the right to vote, but it's also 7 years after Susan B. Anthony passed away. And so this was only one of 22 photos that I could find in the Historical Resource Center of women. But what I love most about this, in fact, I carry this with me everywhere I go. It's on my phone, it's in my home. What I love most about this photo, this was actually called a suffrage pageant. It's on the front steps of Treasury, and those 6 windows from the corner was my office. So I walked up these steps every day as a reminder of those who came before me. And if you were to ever go into the Treasury building today, you will find in the west wing of Treasury on the main floor all 22 of those photos on the walls. That was one of the first projects I did with the approval of Secretary Geithner, my boss. I just couldn't imagine that only 22 of these photos and all the history that's been done in Treasury, that those are the only photos I could find. But they are still there, by the way, in perpetuity, what I call the Gallery of Women in Treasury. So that was kind of my first awakening, if you will, but there was something else that happened. In December of that same year, 2008, after you look at something for a while, you start to see a pattern, right? And so when I'm looking in the Historical Resource Center, and there were things that have never been seen by anyone alive, by the way. I'm looking through all these great renderings and concepts and images of all these financial products. You start to see a pattern. And what I noticed, the pattern were all these images that were used on all those products that I mentioned, all of them that included women weren't real women. They were allegorical figures, like Lady Liberties, sometimes clothed, sometimes unclothed. But every single image that I came across of a man was a real man, a founding father, a cabinet member, a president. And so I thought, well, this is kind of interesting that we don't really exist in the real domain. And so I started doing a little bit of research, and I noticed that we have never, in the history of our country, have had the portrait of a woman on our Federal Reserve notes, ever. Well, I thought that was kind of strange, right? Because when you think about currency just doesn't facilitate commerce. In fact, if you go around the world, you will look on every denomination of currency, just about anywhere. You'll see always a very important person on the front and a very symbolic edifice or monument on the back. So if this is the way we tell the story of our country, why are we missing half the population? So I asked the Bureau of Engraving and Printing director, where we print the currency, why this has happened. I asked the same question to his deputy and his deputy. Between the 3 of them, they had almost 100 years at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, on why we've never had this before. I asked them individually, they had the same answer. Ready? The answer was, no one's ever brought it up. How could that be, right? And it's not like it had to be the treasurer's job. In fact, by law, there's only one person responsible for currency design in our country, by law. It's not Congress, it's not the president, it's the Secretary of the Treasury. So I made the decision when I was one of 7 people recommended for a permanent appointment as part of the transition team. I decided to take the job as Treasurer of the United States for many reasons, but primarily to work on this project. I wanted to kind of open the eyes of folks and kind of really think about this a little bit more on why this was happening. And so I was nominated by President Obama in May of 2009, confirmed by the Senate in July of 2009, moved my family, and never really looked back. It was actually one of the best experiences I've ever had, and it really opened up my eyes to the world in a very, very different way. And along the way, I wanted to kind of set the tone, if you will, for why this was important. And you might recall in 2016 when we engaged in a very, very public engagement process in 2015. And this is one of my favorite items that I received during that time. This is actually from a school in New York who these young girls sat down and actually drew themselves on currency. Can you imagine what was going through their heads as they're literally drawing themselves as future history makers, right? It's what I call inspirations for aspirations. It's who influences them to think about their future and for them to think about themselves as part of our history in the future was really powerful. But I also, before I embarked on this very rigorous process of redesigning our nation's currency, I wanted to kind of test the waters with my workplace to see if there would be support for something like this. And by the way, there's only a handful of us who are working on this because I didn't want it to get out in the media. I didn't want it to get political. I wanted to really follow a very rigorous and technical process on how currency is designed. But I did want to kind of see where Secretary Geithner where his mind was on some of these issues. And so I actually went to him in January of 2009. And there I am in the administration. I said to him, Tim, do you realize I'm still the only woman here confirmed in Treasury? Which was true. There we were 1 year into the administration, in one of the most consequential times of our economic history, and I'm still it in January of 2010. And I said, Tim, this coming March is the 30th anniversary of Women's History Month. I said, do you realize that 4 of the 6 economic decision makers in the administration are women? He says, what do you mean? I said, well, there's Sheila Bair at the FDIC, Christina Romer at the Council of Economic Advisors, Mary Shapiro at the SEC, and at the time, Elizabeth Warren, the head of the Congressional Oversight Panel. The only ones you're missing in that mix are you and Larry. Larry Summers, at the time, the head of the NEC. I said, if I had my druthers, I would love to have an event where that would be panel 1, talking about what their respective agencies are doing in the recovery, and panel 2 would be the female pioneers of Wall Street, Abby Joseph Cohen, Ruth Perret, et cetera. And his immediate response was, how can I help? Which is a great response. Of course, you run out of the room at that moment and say yes, and you give him all these great assignments. But what was amazing was all those women I just mentioned accepted my invitation. These are women you will never see speaking at women's conferences, even today. So why do they accept my invitation? Because I made it clear to them that we're not going to talk about work-life balance. We're not going to talk about having it all. We're going to talk about the economic recovery and what they're doing to work on it. So we did it, March of 2010. It was amazing, and lo and behold, it led to the cover of Time magazine. The very first paragraph of this article, this very robust and fabulous article, was this symposium that I put on, and how novel it was that women could actually talk about the economy. Isn't that amazing? Isn't it great? It's wonderful. But I knew I was onto something. And what really, really convinced me that I was onto something is when I was briefing Secretary Geithner before the event. The event was on a Monday. There I am in his office on a Friday, going through the details. He stops me in the middle of the briefing and he says, you know, my daughter Elise, who at the time was an undergrad at Stanford, my daughter Elise is in town this weekend. I wonder if I can get her to change her flight so she can stay for this on Monday. Inspirations for aspirations. He saw this as a very historic opportunity for his own daughter to be inspired and think about her own future. So yes, there was something that I needed to do. And I wanted to make it clear that when we engaged on that public process, I didn't want it to be about 1 woman or 10 women. I wanted it to be about the hundreds of women who've been overlooked in our history. Because I spent almost an entire year traveling around the country soliciting feedback in person, town halls, but also Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, letters, hate mail, all of it. And I realized a couple of things. I realized how little the American public knows about our history and how much less they know about women in our history. So when we made the announcement in April of 2016 of Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill, I aggregated a database of almost 300 historical American women, and I made sure that that database was posted on our Treasury website, so it became a public document. Very simple, last name, first name, date of birth, date of death, a summary of who they are, and a public image. And I wanted to make sure that people knew that this wasn't a token woman. And what happened during that time, I gotta tell you, all these aha moments for me, really, and I feel like I'm still evolving. But it was during that public engagement process. In fact, it was August 17th, 2015. That morning, I got an email from my high school history teacher, whose class I hadn't taken at that time for at least 34 years. Yikes. So he said he saw my interview on CNN about the currency design. He wanted to congratulate me, but he also wanted to thank me, because he said he walked into that same classroom that morning, and I think at that time he'd been teaching 36 years at my high school, and he's still there, by the way, Mr. Wilder, teaching American history at Monroe High School in Hayward, California, still there. He said he walked in the classroom that morning and realized at that time that after 36 years of teaching American history, he'd never had an image of a woman on his classroom walls. Never thought about it. Salt to the earth, it's not like it was deliberate omission. It was just a consciousness that didn't exist. And he wanted to change it. And he did. He invited me back. That fall, I walked into the classroom, that same classroom, and there on the walls were Susan B. Anthony, Harriet Tubman, and me. It was very cute. But it dawned on me, if one teacher or 100 teachers or 1,000 teachers did the same thing, can you imagine what that does for our girls and our boys? This isn't a chick thing, right? I'll never forget when I decided, when I left the administration and I wanted to kind of make a difference with this database, my high school, Monroe High School, and I decided to do a pilot project together, which is called Teachers Writing History. This is basically taking that database and integrating it into classrooms across the country, the same database. And it took off like crazy. What really surprised me about it, well, first of all, it was the New Haven Unified School District that contacted me when they heard about this and said that they wanted me to come to their board meeting and make a presentation that they could integrate this into their school, which they did. It passed, but it took off from there. And I'll never forget getting a letter from the headmaster of the King's School in Connecticut saying that one of his male students wanted to start a Teachers Writing History club. And in this letter, this particular student, Jason, said, "I don't think of teachers writing history as a gender initiative. It's just the story of our country." That's exactly right. It's not his story or her story, it's our story. But I wanted to dig down a little deeper and really understand why was this resonating as much with boys as it was girls. And here's what I found out. It's amazing that these kids, this next generation of kids, they literally look at this as just amazing stories, right? If you think it's hard to be a woman today, can you imagine what it was like 50 years ago, or 100 years ago, or 150 years ago? So these are stories about women who have to dress up like a man to serve in a war. These are stories about women who have to teach themselves how to read by candlelight, because God forbid people find out that they're literate, right? So these are stories of drama and intrigue and courage and strength. Complete drama that interests them, and they just happen to be women. So for me, that was kind of a big aha moment in terms of how to really think about this, and how to really think about this in terms of this next generation who sees the world with a completely different lens than my generation. And I wanted to really tap into that. And so after starting Teachers Writing History, I became a visiting scholar at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard. And I decided to make a concerted effort when I launched Empowerment 2020, my nonprofit. What started out as a gender initiative quickly turned into a generational initiative. I wanted to get into the heads of these millennials and post-millennials and really understand how they see the world. And of course, I happen to have two of my own. My daughter is 19, my son is 23. I really wanted to kind of understand the world through a different lens. And so in my Visiting Scholars program is when I really kind of understood what the next generation of leaders is going to look like. And for me, something else happened during that time. Again, when you have your eyes open and you try to look for what you don't see, it's very liberating. And I realized that women are invisible in everywhere that we look. Kind of crazy. So I'll give you another example. You heard a little bit about it. So of course, statues, right? This is how we institutionalize our history. Again, statues. This happened, another awakening happened. It was actually my award ceremony in 2016 when I had all my friends and family fly out. And I started doing all the tours in DC that you never get to do when you're there. And so we were walking around DC, and I realized, oh my gosh, this is our nation's capital. Where are the women? So that weekend, I did a little bit of a research project, and I figured out that over the 150 statues in DC, only 2 outdoors in the public domain are of real American women, identifiable American women. Any guesses on who they are, 2? Eleanor Roosevelt at her husband's memorial, thank you. The only other one is Mary McLeod Bethune at Lincoln Park. That's it. Outdoors in the public domain, identifiable American women, historical American women. That's it for our nation's capital. So, I mean, that interests me, right? This is where people come from all over the world to see what we value and whom we value. How could that be? So just for fun, that following week, I did another little experiment. I took the top 10 cities by population, because critical mass is key to make this point. Top 10 cities by population, 3 are in Texas. I added in DC, in my hometown of San Francisco. Of those 12 cities combined, outdoors in the public domain, either in their main parks or downtown, there are less than half a dozen statues combined of all 12 of those cities. So I took that on as another challenge to see what I can do. And you heard Nick talk a little bit about Central Park. Actually, there's 3 women in Central Park, by the way. Mother Goose, Alice in Wonderland, and Juliet from Romeo and Juliet. So 3 women, yay. In fact, if you were to walk out of the Plaza Hotel and turn left, you're facing the south side of Central Park, you will see, in order, Commander Sherman, Jose Marti, Simon Bolivar, all on their horses. All the international conquistadors are well represented in Central Park. So as I started talking about this when I left the administration, this was in DC, a woman comes up to me and she says, oh my goodness, that story about Central Park, that's crazy. She says, I'm from New York Life Insurance. You need to come meet with our foundation. You need to come meet with our CEO. They need to hear this. This can't be the case. So fast forward to 6 months later, where I was the closing speaker for New York Life's announcement of $500,000 in the first ever female statue in Central Park, to be unveiled August 26, 2020, which is our suffrage centennial. And it'll be Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Sojourner Truth. So you know we'll all be on August 26, 2020. DC, where I have spent now 2 very large hearings, where I was the key testimony for DC's proposal for 8 new statues in DC. San Francisco, where some might say that's the most progressive and inclusive city in the world. Again, my hometown. How many statues do you think we have outdoors in the public domain of historical American women? Any guesses? 0. Fast forward, where 2 legislative aides heard me speak from Supervisor Mark Farrell's office. Boy, they took it by the horns, those 20-somethings. They really did it. Fast forward to our official announcement, where hopefully later this year we will be unveiling Maya Angelou in front of the public library. So exciting. And most recently, on May 1st of this year, where I will be in Dallas, where we will unveil over 100 3D-generated statues of women in Dallas. So my goal is to have all 12 of those cities completed or underway by 2026. Why did I choose 2026? Anyone? Yikes. All right. It is the 250th anniversary of our nation's founding. Now, I remember the bicentennial like it was yesterday. I remember 1976. I was 11 years old. I'll never forget going to the Hayward Airport and seeing our fabulous fireworks display, or going to the Oakland Amtrak station where we had the Freedom Train come into town, where here I was, one of 9 kids, hardly ever leaving our little neighborhood, but being able to go and see our nation's history just a few miles away. So to be part of now, I've been recently appointed to this congressional commission that is now starting to plan this very big commemoration in 2026. And I assure you that women's history will be well represented. And again, it's not about women's history. It is our story. It's 51% of the population. But here's what really is kind of amazing about that. I can give you hundreds of examples where women don't exist in our public domain. And I want to make it clear, this is not just about currency. This is not just about education. This is not just about leadership positions. There's a consciousness that does not exist in this country. The leader of the free world, in fact, today, of the developed nations, it's pretty much still us and Saudi Arabia who don't have women on the modern day currency. It's actually true. So this isn't, by the way, about a woman for the sake of a woman. That's not what I do. That's not what I think. This whole currency design started because of a theme. So every generation of currency has a theme. And in fact, if you've seen the $100 bill with the blue security ribbon going down the middle, that was the last denomination of that generation of notes, the theme was symbols of freedom. Why is that important? Because when the first note was issued in 2002, it was post 9/11. And it was intended to be a reminder on the values on which our country was founded. So if you look on that $100 bill, you'll see the Liberty Bell. You'll see the Declaration of Independence text. On the $10 bill, you see the torch of the Statue of Liberty. Again, just a reminder, a very important reminder of that moment in time. So the theme that I chose for this next generation of notes is the theme of democracy, which, by the way, is still the theme that exists today. Why did I choose democracy? Because think about what was happening at that point in time in the administration, right? So it was the origins of the Occupy movement and the Tea Party movement. It was also the origins of the mass-scale use of social media, right? Some might say that led to the first election of an African-American president. And it wasn't just happening domestically, look what was happening overseas, right? With the Arab Spring. And some might say that social media is what really gave a voice to the voiceless in many, many ways. But it was also, for me, as we were working on this currency design, realizing that when we were going to unveil the first set of notes in 2020, oh my God, it hit me like a ton of bricks. 2020 is the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, granting women the right to vote. What better way to represent democracy than giving 51% of your population the ability to participate in the governance process? That's how this became about a woman. It wasn't a woman for the sake of a woman. It was this theme that still, again, remains intact today. And I do feel like if we continue to marginalize 51% of the population, I think there are really severe consequences. And I'm going to give you my theory of some of those consequences. So you all know what unconscious bias is. Unconscious bias is when you don't realize that you're being influenced by something you're exposed to. Could it be that we don't realize that we're being influenced by something we're not exposed to? And the answer is, of course. You've all heard about if you can see it, you can be it. You absolutely have to visualize your future. Anyone in this next generation will tell you that. And I think what's missing is the tactile, the physical. Everything that I focus on has a physical component because it's so important for this next generation to feel that physical connection, right? So, I mean, when we were kids, what did we collect? We collected stamps and coins and trading cards. What do kids collect these days? Likes, followers, games, right? So this physical representation is something that happens when you touch something. The brain synapses go in a different direction. You actually feel it. So for me, that physical representation is very, very important. And so lo and behold, you know, I think this is something that is very, very serious because I do think, I mean, I've been talking about this physical representation for a while, and lo and behold, this article comes out in January of 2017 from Science Magazine, which basically talks about when a girl starts to question their intellectual ability. 3 takeaways from this article. 6-year-old girls are less likely than boys to think they're really, really smart. 6-year-old girls are less likely to pursue activities where you have to be really, really smart. And the biggest changes of this intellectual questioning happens between the ages of 5 and 7. Why? School. So no matter how much you protect them at home, once they get out into the real world, whether it's the mean girls, the boys who pick on them, the teachers who don't call on them, what they don't see in their classroom, yes, there are consequences to this. And I think it continues on. I think that, you know, this is what I call the confidence deficit. If you don't address something when it happens at the point, it compounds, right? When a girl takes algebra, it's one of the biggest determinants on whether they're going to continue on into the math and sciences. When a young girl starts college, for many of us, that's the first time we actually feel a physical vulnerability. Those confidence deficits are real. And I do think, look, if 51% of the population right now were left-handed Lithuanians, that's what I'd be talking about. But the fact that 51% of the population are our daughters, look, we all have a mother, a sister, a daughter, a niece, and a granddaughter, etc. When you think about it as an equity issue, like Secretary Geithner did as we're planning our Women in Finance Symposium. When you think about it as an equity issue, it's an extension of yourself. And you feel this urgency. And I know people hate when I say this, but most of my champions have been men with daughters. It's true. And that means it is a future leadership issue. So where do I think this might be manifesting itself? Well, I mean, I hate to share it. I'm going to be the Debbie Downer for half a second, really. But there is hope. And so, look, we all know that women make most of the decision-making, finance decisions in the house. We all know that. We all know that women are matriculating and getting degrees, et cetera, like crazy. It's fabulous. It's wonderful. And how is this continuing, though? Like we know, we all remember when we started our careers and how excited we were, and then something happens. Yikes. All right, here's where I'm going to be the Debbie Downer. This is my theory. It's no accident that women flatline at 20%. You look at every major political, social, and economic indicator, and I can say this for just about anywhere I walk into. Whether I just spoke at a national healthcare organization, whether I just spoke at a major investment bank, I can say, in fact, this actually is a true story, I bet that all your managing directors and above, the percentage of women is about 20%. And the head of HR raises her hand, it's 19%. Ah, okay. I mean, again, these aren't my numbers, these are the numbers. So I don't say this with a lot of pride, because it's actually kind of sad. But if 80% of the economic decision makers are men, this isn't a chick issue. All of us need to have this discussion of what it means and how it translates and how it is absolutely going to affect your daughter. And it's amazing when I actually talk to men in these executive decision-making capacities and I tell them, if it doesn't change today, it will affect your daughter. It surprises them. What do you mean? No, my daughter will never have to. Well, she will. She will. Numbers don't lie. So for all of you who are just starting your career, thinking about your career, there is absolutely a lot of hope. And that is why, again, I really do focus on this next generation of leadership. There is something really amazing about all those girls who were on stage earlier. The passion that they feel. And I'm going to share with you some of the takeaways that I learned about millennials and post-millennials in my 2 years at Harvard and how it continues to this day, because I am absolutely putting all my eggs in that basket. And who, by the way, who has a kid who was born after 1990 in this room? All right, you can tell me later on if you think I'm accurate. So here's what I've learned. So anyone born after 1990 basically grew up with the internet. They see the world as very flat. It's no longer about who's sitting next to them in class. It's really everyone that they read about and what they learn and what they see, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But they're less likely to think about kind of the same borders, boxes, and boundaries that my generation is stuck with. They're less likely to think about Democrat versus Republican, less likely to think about orientation, less likely to think about male versus female, less likely to think about institutionalized religion. It's actually really interesting. They love kind of the flexibility and optionality of it all. They want choices. And what's amazing about them, too, is they are so passionate. They want to make an impact. Unfortunately, they really kind of just don't know what that is yet. And this is where I think the League of Women Voters can play a huge role in giving this passion and this purpose to this next generation. No matter what hat you want to wear, that passion is very, very real. And so, again, my two kids, 19 and 23, I mean, again, you know, this certainly defines them, but I've met with thousands of these kids, and for the most part, they have all pretty much been confident, progressive, educated, savvy with technology. How does my daughter know how to fix a vacuum cleaner where I wouldn't even know how to approach it? It's kind of amazing the level of competence, technical competence that they have. That's pretty unprecedented. And again, because they basically have seen everything. They've learned everything. But they still need us, by the way. They still need us as parents to help guide them. That anxiety that they feel, oh, it's real. It's real. With the pressure that they feel from social media, the pressure to get into that college, et cetera, it is absolutely real. And so what I'm doing now, and by the way, this is not what I do for a living in terms of my projects, but this is what I live to do. I am trying to find all those opportunities to empower them to get that confidence back and to, again, see their future. And again, this isn't just a gender issue. I mean, the world is changing. Our country is changing. And again, this is reality. These aren't my numbers. These aren't my numbers. In 2020, those 18 years old and younger in the U.S. will be majority minority. In 10 years, that'll be the case for kids under 30. By 2045, this country will be majority minority. The train has already left the station. You're not going to stop it. It's happening. So when you look at the world in that way, it is very well that your neighborhood or your kids or your grandkids are going to represent a totally different demographic. Welcome to the U.S. So what are we doing in terms of thinking about how to keep these kids with that same kind of open lens? So I'm going to share with you some of the projects that I'm doing. I know we're going to end in a few minutes to get some Q&A, but I'm going to share very briefly some of the projects that I've been doing. I'm a one-person show, but it's amazing what happens when you get me in front of a decision maker. So I'll never forget one of the first times when I left the administration, I was asked by Mattel to make a presentation to their 80 global executives. They wanted to learn about millennials and post-millennials and their consumer habits. So I went to LA, and I decided if I'm getting in front of a group of senior executives, I'm going to turn the tables. So I said to Mattel, I told them the story about my daughter, Brooke, who's now 19. Now, you probably know Mattel is Barbies and Hot Wheels and everything in between. My daughter, Brooke, hated Barbies with a passion. She wanted to be her brother. She wore his clothes. She played his sports. And I remember one year when I was thinking about what to get her for the holidays. I hate buying gifts. I like to make them. And I came across something on the internet that Mattel had made. By the way, my kids are half Asian. I came across something on the internet called Asian Barbie. And it was a kind of a social experiment that Mattel made to kind of test the biracial market. What was interesting about Asian Barbie is it looked exactly like my daughter. But if I would have bought that and wrapped it up and given it to her, she would have opened it up, laughed, thrown it against the wall, and run out of the room. But what I did was I bought Asian Barbie, and I made her basketball uniform, and I put it on Asian Barbie, and I showed Mattel the video of her opening up this gift. She looks at it, and she says, "Oh my God, this is me." She actually thought I had Mattel make it just for her, exactly like that. And it's interesting, the girl who hated Barbies, when you walk into a room today, that's the only thing you'll see on her headboard, is her wearing this basketball uniform. So I said to Mattel, look, you have the power and influence to change this next generation. You literally have this captive audience. Why don't we use real people to influence them and let them think about their own dreams? And so you might have seen in 2018 when they released Amelia Earhart, Frida Kahlo, and Katherine Johnson. Again, inspirations for aspirations, using real people for this next generation to think about their own future, not just for girls, but for boys as well. Something else that happened after this was I was asked to throw out the first pitch for the Oakland A's, yay, against the Giants in my hometown. I'm a big Oakland A's fan, so 42,000 of my closest friends came to see me throw out the first pitch. It was my daughter who said to me, when the A's said, look, don't throw from the mound. No one throws from the mound. It's 60 feet, 6 inches. You know, it's ceremonial. Get as close as you want. My daughter says, oh no. You are throwing from the mound like everyone else, and I'm going to train you. And she did. She was a big baseball player as a kid. I did it. I threw from the mound. It was amazing. And lo and behold, 6 months later, my lawyer calls me and he says, do you realize you have a baseball card out there? I said, what do you mean? He said, did you sign a release form? I said, yes. He says, so Topps, unbeknownst to me, Topps made a baseball card of me. 500,000 of them sold out. They called me one day, so they're owned by Michael Eisner in New York. They called me one day and they said, look, you probably know that you have a baseball card out there. They said, and by the way, I only have 6 of my own cards. I can't even get my own card. They said, would you mind coming in and signing some of your cards because we're doing this national treasure hunt at one of our conventions. First I said no because I've been hiding under a rock and I didn't want that. But I thought about it. I said, you know what? Yes. I will come in, I'll sign whatever you want if you do this one project with me. So lo and behold, yes, we are doing baseball cards of my database. Absolutely. So Susan B. Anthony, Harriet Tubman is next. Major League Baseball has already agreed to have my cards distributed on every game that's being played on August 26, 2020. Very exciting. But there's so much more to do. So much more. And again, I could talk for hours about my projects, but again, the beauty about this is they're tangible. They are of historical nature so that you can learn about our history in order to think about your future. And I think that there's this other milestone. So 2020, first of all, thank you to all of you, the League of Women Voters, for spending your Saturday to be here to talk about something so important as exercising the right to vote. It really is something. So this is just the beginning. 2020 is not over, right? And even when 2020 comes and goes, there's so much more to do. As you think about 2026, that is another very big milestone in terms of our 250th anniversary of our nation's founding, and really the values, again, on which our country was founded. So between now and then, again, I have my work cut out for us. Again, I want to share some of that with you. And one of them is this very big project with Google that we launched in the New York City school system last year, that we are going to do a national launch, which I'll show you the video in a second. But what I say to all, and I'm going to end on the video, but what I say to all of you is, your voice matters across the board because you empower these kids, this next generation, to take a leadership role. There's nothing more important than participating in the governance process. All those people who fought for the right to vote. I mean, think about it. In 1870, the 15th Amendment passed that gave all men the right to vote. We had to wait 50 more years between then and 1920 to get the right to vote for women. So let's not let that go to waste. Let's use this as an opportunity to really give this next generation the passion and purpose that they're looking for. And with that, I'm going to end with this very last video of this fabulous project I'm working on that will be launched later this year on a national level.
When you look at a note, you see a figure from our nation's history staring back at you. They're like these tiny history lessons in our pocket. But for over a century, no U.S. note has featured a woman. My name is Rosie Rios, former Treasurer of the United States. In 2015, I worked with the Department of the Treasury to create a list of hundreds of historic women whom the American people recommended to appear on U.S. currency. The following year, Harriet Tubman was chosen from this list to be the new face of the $20 bill. This was historic. But I couldn't help but think, why do we have to choose just one? Couldn't there be some way to celebrate all of these women on our currency? Notable Women is a project that lets you put 100 of these history-making women onto any U.S. note. To make this possible, we're using augmented reality. You just hold your device over any U.S. bill, and you'll see these historic figures in a place you've never seen them before. There is no better place for this than in our schools.
It has the names on top.
Yeah, that's definitely cool.
Here, these notable women can continue to inspire the next generation of history makers. With this technology, anyone with a phone and a dollar has a new way to experience our nation's history.
Thank you.
The bad, the ugly, the challenges, the boundaries, the opportunities of women's suffrage and for women today. Rosie Rios, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Yes, she deserves a standing ovation. By the way, those baseball cards of Rosie, $85,000 on eBay. There's one of her, by the way, in a Royals uniform. Those are $185,000. I will happily take any of your questions. I have many of my own. But we mentioned, for instance, what you had done with statues, which I really never thought much about before. You really nailed that in our thinking of why that was important to avoid the invisibility issue. You've made change there. What is the status, though, of putting a woman on the currency of the United States? Where are we at with that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So again, by law, it is the Secretary of the Treasury who has the final decision-making on a currency design, and it is up to this current secretary to make that decision, not the president, not Congress, and so that is up to them.
What do you say to people who would say, this is really, though, very, very symbolic, and isn't there something far more meaningful we could do that would change the dignity and the condition and the well-being of women in this country rather than just putting a woman on a piece of currency?
Absolutely. And you know, again, I tried to make that correlation between visibility and value. And it goes back to this very simple question. We value what we see every day, but do we see what we value? And it's amazing what happens when you walk into any random location. I'll give you a great example. When I did my TED Talk in Bermuda, I'll never forget when we were going to have the VIP reception right after the event. And so there were maybe about 100 of us who were walking over to the VIP reception, which was in the Bacardi headquarters. I'm going to put them on the spot for a second. Now, Bacardi has this gigantic, beautiful lobby in their corporate headquarters. And when you walk into this very large lobby, you will see on on the walls, the main wall, you'll see these 3 gigantic life-size portraits of white men. There's nothing wrong with that, except right next to that, in one of the large glass offices, is a very large portrait of a female ballerina. And then the next office had a very large portrait of a naked woman. Now, I take my daughter to a lot of these receptions. If she were to walk into that one reception, she would think to herself, well, I could be the ballerina or the naked woman, but I'm never getting on that wall. What's interesting about Bacardi is actually they are influenced by the matriarchs and the widows in terms of some of their management decisions, who were all there, by the way. And so it's amazing when you walked into that reception area and people who had just heard me speak, and the chatter, the whisper, oh my God, look what's on the walls. So it's not at the expense of men. This isn't that at all. In fact, again, if men are in 80% of the executive decision making, they have to be part of the solution. So it is this consciousness that when you wake up and realize what's missing, it's empowering. It's also kind of sad, right? It's kind of a big burden to walk around and know, my God, why aren't we there or there or there or there? Those numbers, again, those 20% numbers, those are the numbers. And if there is a correlation between this confidence deficit that compounds as you keep growing up and keep growing up. If it starts at 5 and keeps going and going and going, and we don't address it, those numbers aren't going to change.
You have that 20% ceiling then of representation that you show from
thing.
Congress to boards to being in the C-suite.
Every industry I've ever spoken to.
What was the biggest change that could take place, though, to elevate that number?
So, in my opinion, look, if a woman chooses to work or not to work, I wish I would have had that option of not working. That's not the issue. I'm not saying every woman has to be a career woman and every woman has to be a CEO. That's not it at all. But in this day and age where it literally takes a 2-person family, and if you were to ask most of your millennials and post-millennials, most of those women want a career. It is what it is. But I'll never forget, and here's what's interesting, too many true stories. When I walked into that Treasury building, one of the things I noticed in the first year that I was there was how a lot of the women weren't coming back after maternity leave. And I thought, well, this is kind of odd. And I realized, I literally talked to one of the women who actually came back and said, hey, what's going on here? Why aren't a lot of the women coming back? And she said, if you can believe this, we have nowhere to nurse. Like there's nowhere, we have to ambush conferences. I'm thinking, wait a minute. This building was built in the year 1800. Am I not in one of the most progressive and inclusive administrations that we don't have a nursing lounge in this building? So I took it upon myself. I used my own money. We established the first official nursing lounge in Treasury. And lo and behold, that same woman came to me and said, the reason I came back to work was because I actually now have a place to go. And by the way, it became official as part of the Affordable Care Act, where all federal buildings, by law, have to have a nursing lounge. But here's the thing, it's not just the physical. It's not just the physical, it's the personal. Feeling valued. If you feel like you actually have a space to live your life, to do what you need to do. I nursed in a toilet, for God's sakes, right? And so if you come back to a workplace that values who you are and what you need to do a better job, that makes a difference. So it's the tangible, it's the physical, but it's that third dimension, this value component, right? The quantitative plus the qualitative that makes a difference in how you feel in terms of pursuing your dreams.
We're getting a lot of questions. One of them, when people think of feminism, they think of white women. How have you changed that, or what do you think can be done for Latinos and African American women?
What a great question, and this is where I get in trouble. If If you would have known me 12 years ago, not that I didn't support feminism, but I have been very fortunate in my career where I've had amazing bosses, and because I came from a career of real estate finance, it was very quantitative. So as long as I made my hurdles, I was compensated. I never really had to think about, I'm a woman, I'm a Latina, blah, blah, blah. I never had to wear that to work. It was really when I went into the administration where you look around and realize, how am I the only woman here? How did that happen that I'm the only, it's like Newton's third law, every action has an opposite and equal reaction. When you realize you're the only one, you're going, oh, something's wrong. The thing about feminism that I think is really interesting for me is, I was born in 1965, and I was raised in a very conservative Catholic household. So 6 girls in my family, and so, growing up, if you turned on the TV in 1970 or 1971, and there I was, 5, 6 years old, my mom was not about to allow us to watch TV where what you would see are images of bra burning and abortion and contraception. Those weren't things that my mom thought were appropriate for us at the height of the feminist movement. What I didn't realize back then that I accept now, no matter who you are, is that real feminism was around me the whole time. It was my mom. It is my mom raising us as a single parent and sending all 9 of us off to college. It is my daughter who is no doubt in my mind going to rule the world, as all of us think about our own daughters. That is feminism. It is feeling empowered to pursue the life you want to lead, whether you want to be the best mom in the world, the best grandma in the world, but do you have that choice? That is feminism, no matter who you are.
If there's one common question that comes up is how can we help? Organizations like the League of Women Voters changes its mission over the course of that period of time. Things they concentrate on today are different than they may have started with. But everyone wants to breathe new life into an organization. What's the number one thing a group like this can do
the mission
to help the cause you're talking about?
The mission remains the same. The mission remains the same, which is your whole goal to be here on a Saturday afternoon listening to me. I am humbled, but really the power lies within you to get the information that people need to make their own decision, no matter what hat you're wearing. It doesn't matter what hat you're wearing. The fact that you want to get people to the polls, the fact that you want to get people excited about their governance, that's what means the most. It doesn't matter who you are, but the fact that you're here, let me make something very clear. There is no knight in shining armor. DC is not going to save you. Your governor is not going to save you. You are going to save you, and that's why you're all here.
You showed, for a lot of your presentation, a picture behind you of Mount Rushmore. If you were adding a woman to Mount Rushmore, who does Rosie Rios add?
My mom. No doubt, no doubt. And you know what's great about that is when I left the administration, the gift that my staff at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing gave to me, it was the most wonderful gift. You're going to honor me. The best way to get to me is to honor my mom. And so they actually designed this beautiful $10 bill with my mom's image on it. It was actually very, very nice. Very nice.
A lot of people want to know, how do they get your video? How do they get their presentation? They'd like to share it.
I'm working on a few things right now. My Empowerment 2020 website, empowerment2020.org, has a lot of information on there. Not these particular slides, but look, I mean, for me, again, I mentioned I'm a one-person show. It is not about me, but it is about my daughter, and everyone has to find that passion, that one thing that really drives them. So if this is part of your passion, great, but I think for all of us, it really is just this elevating, this consciousness that does not exist in this country when it comes to 51% of the population. And I'm using 2026 as kind of the line in the sand, right? I don't think of this as the end of this journey for us in terms of this 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. This is just the beginning. And so when we all think about, again, not his story, not her story, but our story, and what this means in terms of this being not just a United States, but we are a United Nations, right? Think about when our country was founded in 1776. I mean, think about where the states were, right? So Alaska was Russia. Hawaii was a kingdom. California was Mexico. Texas and New Mexico, the Spanish influence. And Louisiana was France. And then, of course, straddling all of that was the slave and Native American experience. We are a nation of nations. And so how do we tell all those stories so that we can hopefully find this collective voice that we might not have today?
Rosie Rios, the former treasurer of the United States of America.
Thank you.
even though you have to board a flight this afternoon, are you going to still celebrate with some cake with us?
Yes, I'm staying, of course.
We,
yes, I'll
we
be here.
actually
I'll
have
sign your money.
we have a 100-year-old cake for you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank
She
you.
found it in the archives
Thank you
at the
so much.
Treasury Building, a 100-year-old cake that we get to enjoy. We have punch for you. We have a pop-up exhibit on the history of the League of Women Voters
Yay.
over 100 years. Lots to celebrate together. More information about the League of Women Voters.
Thank
you for being with us.
Thank you so much.
And
I'll be
thanks
out
all
there.
to
I'll
you.
be out there.
As
Thank
Rosie
you.
said, there are a million places you could be today. Thanks being here for the League of Women Voters here at Johnson County Community College. We'll see you right out in the foyer.
Thank you.
Excellent.